There we go. All right, so we'll get started with chapter 9. We're going to be talking today and Thursday about managed care, which is a major innovation in health insurance and the way that care is not only paid for, but delivered. And because the two, if we haven't kind of put that together yet, right, the way care is paid for has a direct impact on the way care is delivered. Like we've hopefully have talked enough about that you get that sense that it's very important to carefully consider in a healthcare system how care is paid for, because it directly affects the actors in the marketplace who are providing the care and how they choose to deliver it. So we've seen this slide before. This is again our total expenditure on healthcare in the United States. And what you can see is going back to 1960, it was a tiny amount of money. And so back in the 60s, we would have thought, why not give everybody free healthcare, free quote unquote healthcare, right? It's such an inexpensive item to give. But the cost of healthcare has radically increased over time. And so we implemented Medicare and Medicaid in 1965, right? It started ramping up, and the cost of care started ramping up dramatically. Now, also through this period, as I've said many times, we were becoming dramatically wealthier. So a household back in the 50s, I know a bunch of you are nutrition majors. Back in the 50s, households spent something like 50% of their household budget on food. Today, we spend somewhere closer to 5 to 10% on average. The average American household spends somewhere like 5 to 10% on food. Well, if you were spending 50% of your income on food, there's a lot less you can buy, right? There's a lot less fun stuff you can do. You can't take vacations. You can't. If you're spending half of your money on food, that's a lot. If I can give you back 40% of, if I can give you back 80% of that 50%, so I can reduce your spend from 50% to 10%, you are wealthier, because now you can buy, in addition to buying food, you can buy a trip to, Cancun, you can buy a computer, you can buy, a nicer car, a second car, right? So back in the 50s, most families had one car. Today, most families have at least two, if not more. So relatively speaking, we were becoming wealthier, but at the same time, we're spending a larger and larger amount of money, an larger absolute amount of money on healthcare, to the point where in the 80s, in the 70s and the 80s, we were starting to say, we have a crisis in healthcare in terms of how much we spend as a society on healthcare. Well, in case you can't tell from the graph, it's only gotten worse, right? So around 82, we passed TEFRA. 83, PPS comes online. So we've talked about PPS and its impacts enough times already. But that was a radical transformation in terms of how healthcare was delivered and paid for. Well, employers were starting to recognize, because employers during World War II had started to include health insurance as one of their standard benefits. And so employers are seeing this increase in health insurance costs, right? Because health insurance helps the average individual pay for healthcare. And so employers were starting to talk about how much, or were starting to become concerned about how much they were spending to provide health insurance to their employees. And it was becoming so expensive that they were having to make choices. And we always do. Can we give the employees a raise, or can we continue to pay for their health care, 100% of their health insurance, or the same percentage of their health insurance? And so over the last 70 or 80 years, a larger and larger portion of the average American's compensation not the take-home cash, but their total compensation, has shifted from cash to benefits, which include health insurance. So when you get your first job, when you graduate, you're going to most likely work for a larger firm. Let's say you're a HMP major and you go work for Mass General. You might be getting paid $20 an hour, but the total cost to Mass General for hiring you doesn't include that. You're thinking, I get paid $20 an hour because that's what I see in my paycheck. But Mass General says, well, not really. That's not all we pay you. We also, by the way, pay for 80% of your health insurance, which costs us an additional, let's say, $4, the equivalent of $4 an hour. So really, from Mass General's perspective, they're not paying $20 an hour for you. They're really paying $24 an hour for you. Now, Mass General doesn't really care. I've kind of talked about this before. Mass General doesn't really care one way or another whether they pay for your health insurance or they just give you $24 in cash, right? Either way, they're relatively indifferent from that perspective, in the sense that it's going to cost them $24. So they could pay $0 towards your health insurance and $20 and $24 in cash to you, in which case you would have to go buy your own health insurance, or they can buy the health insurance for you and pay you less money. Either way, the bill to Mass General for your participation in the delivery of care at that facility is going to cost $24 an hour to them. So you as an employee, however, will prefer to have Mass General pay for your health insurance because they pay for that health insurance with pre-tax dollars. If you have to buy your own health insurance, they would pay you the $24, and then you would have to go out and buy health insurance with money that you earned after you pay Uncle Sam his share of your pay in taxes. So it saves you money because, and let's say you're, just to make it simple, you're in a 25% tax bracket. Uncle Sam is going to take, of that extra $4 that you got paid, Uncle Sam is going to take $1 of it. So you're actually left with just $3 to buy your health insurance, right? But if you let Mass General buy it for you, Mass General can spend $4 on it, right? So you'd have to pay, you would only have $3 to buy insurance. Mass General could buy it for $4. So there's a benefit to that. But what Mass General was seeing is, over time, what they were seeing was the cost per hour for health insurance had gone from, say, $4 to $5 to $6. And so what you're seeing, so Mass General is like, oh, we'll just keep paying for your health insurance. And so, but we were going to give you $1 raise next year, but health insurance has gone up $1. So we're not going to give you a raise. We're just going to keep paying for your health insurance. And so you feel like I'm just getting $20 an hour. I got $20 an hour last year. I'm getting $20 an hour this year. Mass General's not paying me anymore. And Mass General was like, whoa, hold on a minute. We're actually paying $25 an hour for you now, but your health insurance went up by 25% to the equivalent of $5 an hour. So we're really paying you $25 an hour. It's just that you're getting $5 an hour in health insurance and $20 an hour in cash. But to you, who's like, I have to pay my rent, I have to buy my food, I have to, and I'm not getting a raise from that perspective. And Mass General's like, well, let's talk about this then. We used to give you health insurance called indemnity insurance, and we'll get into each of these kinds, where basically you could just go to any doctor you wanted to go see. Hopefully you'd come to Mass General and see our doctors, but you could just go and nobody told you you couldn't, who you could see and who you couldn't see. So if you fell down and banged your knee, you could go directly to an orthopedic surgeon and be like, hey, surgeon, what do you think of my knee? And the surgeon's like, take some Motrin, and here's my bill for $500. And then you take it to the insurance company, and the insurance company would pay the $500 bill. There was no gatekeeper saying, slow down there, Tiger. You don't need to actually go see an orthopedic surgeon because you banged your knee. a nurse practitioner is perfectly capable of also giving you Motrin, right? And by the way, a nurse practitioner will cost us $100. Under indemnity insurance, there's nobody saying that to you. And so that was the insurance you used to have, right? You meaning us all collectively 20, 30 years ago. We all had indemnity insurance where we could go see any doctor we wanted, whenever we wanted, and the insurance company would just pay whatever the normal reimbursement rate was for an office visit. And nobody was saying, you should see a primary care doctor instead of a specialist. That insurance just got more and more and more expensive. So that was the situation I'm just describing, where the Mass General can't afford to both give you a raise in terms of the cash compensation you're getting and continue to pay for your health insurance. And so we were all collectively getting kind of grumpy because we're not seeing increases in the cash that we're bringing home, even though employers were saying our payroll expenses are going way, way, way up. But in that payroll expense was included the cost of things like health insurance. And so enter managed care. Managed care companies have been around for forever in various shapes and forms. But what they start to offer, and the reason they become popular around the 80s, in the 80s and into the 90s, they really kind of take over, is this problem of increasing cost of care. And the primary thing that, I mean, there's a number of things they do, but probably the most obvious thing from your perspective as a consumer of healthcare is they begin to control your ability to, they begin to control your access to care. They begin to limit your ability to choose who you want to use, where you want to go. Whereas under indemnity, under the old-fashioned indemnity insurance, you just went wherever. You paid your copay, you paid your deductible, and then you just went wherever. Under managed care, your care is managed, right? So now it's being managed by the insurance company. And so you give up some control. You give up some control over how you access care, who you get care from. So that's the key factor there is managed care plans offered by managed care companies, so by insurance companies that have a managed care plan, begin to tell you, no, you can't go directly to the orthopedic surgeon. And if you do, we're not paying for that visit, that you're out of pocket for that. The rule is you go to your primary care provider first. That person sees you and determines whether they can provide your care or if you need to actually go to a specialist. So that's what happens in the 80s, right? So we begin to see managed care stepping in. And when managed care steps in, they offer firms like Mass General, again, just using them as an example, but Ford, General Motors, so forth. They offer employers, they say, hey, indemnity insurance is going to go from $4 an hour to $5 an hour next year, but we can keep the cost of that, of your health. We can bring your health insurance, we can keep it at $4. It won't go up to $5. We can help. Maybe we can even get it down to $350 next year. Does that sound like a good deal? And the employer says, yes, that sounds like a good deal. What we'll be able to do to sell this to our employees is we'll be able to reduce our spend on the health insurance portion of their benefits and give them more cash. So if next year we were planning to give you $25 an hour, to spend $25 an hour on employees, on your compensation, instead of having to spend $5 an hour on insurance and then only give you $20 an hour in cash, we can now give you a cash raise from $20 to $21.50 because we can squeeze the money that we were going to spend on insurance, on health insurance, down to from $5 to $350, right? So that begins to look good, that initially looks like a good deal to everybody involved. Like, hey, that's great. The problem is that people didn't like it. Once they actually started to use managed care, they really didn't like it. All right, so that's the setup for the lecture, right? That's the setup for the lecture. People liked the lower cost, but you get what you pay for. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about insurance and moral hazard. So what I've got here is a demand curve. So let's look at this chart. So the y-axis is the price of a doctor's visit, right? So going from the bottom up, the price of a doctor's visit is going higher and higher. And then the y-axis, the bottom axis, sorry, the x-axis, the bottom axis is the number of visits that you want to buy based on the price of a doctor's visit. And the line going down from the top down toward the bottom right, so top left to bottom right, is your demand for doctor's visits. So why does it slope down and to the right? Well, when the price of a doctor's visit is very high, let's say it costs $500 to go see a doctor. If you fall down and bang your knee and you're limping around a bit and it hurts, are you likely to go to see the doctor? You can walk, you can get to class, you're hobbling a little bit, but you can get to class. You might most likely, if you know it's going to cost you $500 out of pocket, you're likely going to say, you know what, I could probably just wait a couple of days, see if it gets better, maybe take some Motrin, maybe put some ice on it. I'll try some different stuff. So you're probably not going to go see the doctor at $500 if you bang your knee. Now, if you fall and you have a huge gash in your leg and you're bleeding, right, you'd be like, all right, that's worth $500. I'll go take care of that. If the price falls now to say $100 out of pocket to go see a doctor, you're still going to be pretty conservative. I mean, $100 is a lot of money. It's a lot of money to me. I'm not going to just go for some random thing. I'm going to want something. I'm going to be pretty serious about why I'm going. So I might go, in this example, at $100, I might go see the doctor 3 times over the course of the year. You know, I have more health issues over the course of a year than 3 times. But when I consider it cost me $100 to see the doctor, I'm going to weigh the potential benefit of seeing the doctor and say, can I live with this? Would this be worth me spending $100 to get seen? And my judgment, and I'm just making up numbers here, but my judgment then would be, I'll probably have 3 episodes where I might want to go see the doctor, right, at a cost of $100. Now let's imagine we keep pushing the price of a doctor's visit down. So we're moving down the y-axis such that a doctor's visit is now $50 per year. So at $100 per year, I might go 3 times. At $50 a year, I'm now weighing the benefit I expect from seeing the doctor against a $50 price tag. Am I likely to go more often to see the doctor at a cost of $50 or less often? What do you think? More, right? If it's cheaper, I'm going to go more times. And this works. And then if I push it down to $10, right? If I push the price down to $10, basically anytime I feel bad, I'm going to just go to the doctor, right? At a cost of $10. $10 is pretty minimal. And you can apply this to anything, right? You could apply this to, I don't know, going to the movies. What? Parking? All right, cost of parking. Yeah, I'm gonna park in the closer parking lots more often. Yeah. I was gonna say like going to the movies, right? So going to the movies is like what, about $10 now? No, I'm crazy. How much is it? 13? All right, 13, 15. All right, so going to the movies is $13. When I was your age, it was like $4. So, but I made $3.75 an hour in my job. So, so going to the movies is say $13 an hour. If you could get, if I changed the price to $5 to go to a movie, would you go to more movies or fewer movies? What do you think? It's not a hard question. Would you go to more movies if it was $5? Yes. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for playing along. So when the price goes down, we want more of a thing. If it's a good thing, right? We don't want more homework, a price of anything, right? We want, but we want more things like more movies. We want to go out more often, right? If Hop and Grind cut its prices from what, like $8 for a burger to $4 for a burger, we'd probably go get more burgers at Hop and Grind. So that's what this demand curve captures, is the relationship between price and quantity, such that as price goes down, the quantity that we demand increases, right? So here, let's assume without insurance, you'd go to the doctor 3 times. That would cost you $300 over the course of a year, right? So you go 3 times without insurance. All right. Now, with insurance, without insurance, you were going to pay $100 to see the doctor. With insurance, you pay a copay of $20 to see the doctor. What happens to your demand for doctor's visits? Well, we just established that if movie price fell from $13 to say $5, that you would go to the movies more often. Well, the same thing happens with doctors. When the insurance company picks up 80% of the cost, effectively to you, going to the doctor drops in price from $100 to $20. You now want to go to the doctor 6 times. The problem is that the insurance company still has to pay $100 per visit, because that's the going rate. Let's assume that is the going rate in the marketplace, right? So if you go 6 times, the total cost of your healthcare is $600. The cost to you is 6 times 20, or $120. So you're getting something that costs $600 for $120. The difference between the $600, the total cost, and the amount that you pay is the amount that the insurance company pays, which is $480. The problem here is you don't really value that visit at $100. You really value that visit. If that 6th visit, you really value that at $20. You wouldn't get that 6th visit if you had to pay $100. You'd be like, no, I can stay home. I'll take Motrin. I'll take an antihistamine. I'll wait to see if this cold gets better before I go to see a doctor, right? So that 3rd visit, in fact, the 4th visit is also not worth $100 to you. It's really worth, let's say, $75, at which point you would have said, no, I won't go. And the 5th visit might be worth, $40 to you. And so you would have said, no, I don't go. And then the 6th visit being worth $20, if it was going to be $100, you would said, definitely not going to go. But at $20 per visit, out of pocket cash from your perspective, you're going to buy 6 visits instead of 3 visits. Now, the problem is that the insurance company is not, your grandmother with her purse, and she takes out, oh, here, sweetie, here's a $20 bill. Go buy yourself some candy. What the insurance company says is, okay, yes, we're going to charge you a $20 copay each time you go to see the doctor. But at the end of the year, we're going to add up all the money we spent on you, and we're going to reset based on your demand, based on our knowledge that at $20 per visit, you're likely to use the doctor 6 times. We know we're going to incur a $480 bill. So what we're going to do is we're going to raise your premiums, your monthly premium, by $40 a month to cover the $480, because the insurance company is not a charity. All insurance does is allow you to spread your costs across time. So if you're going to use 6 visits at $100 a visit, the insurance company is going to charge you that $20 copay, that's $120, and then they're going to collect the other $480 in the form of a premium. And so it feels like you're paying $20 per visit, But at the end of the day, you're really paying $100 per visit for 6 visits because the insurance company just front loads the cost of those additional visits into your premium. So the question then becomes, are you better off by having this arrangement? Well, left to your own devices, you wouldn't have used those additional 3 visits. So this is questionable, and this is a piece of what your textbook gets at when it talks about overutilization, right? There's nobody stopping you. Once we reduce the cost of getting the care, there's nobody stopping you from reaching for those 3 additional visits that left, if you were left in a pure market economy situation, you would not pursue. So we can make a bunch of arguments about this. One being, let's say visit number 4 is actually a well woman visit, going to get a pap smear, going to get, kind of your usual, that kind of, or it's a annual physical for a guy, and you're going to get prostate exam, things like that. Now, the guys, you're too young to have prostate issues. That's more my range area. Thank God I don't have any yet, but that's one of the major things that guys have, where we get, where if you go in, so for guys, you get a we don't get pap smears. If you go in for a prostate exam, we might catch prostate cancer early, and then that prevents you from having to have radical surgery. Ladies, if you get a pap smear and catch uterine cancer early, that prevents you from having to get a hysterectomy and other awful things. So there's a benefit to getting these preventive visits. One of the things we recognized with the one of the things that the ACA tried to fix was the idea that when presented with the bill for the full cost for a annual physical, being in reality would really be, without insurance, would be several $100s. The average person would be like, nah, I'll take that several $100s and roll the dice. I really would rather buy a new iPhone than get my annual physical. So are you better off? Well, sometimes we make bad decisions on our own behalf because we don't think far enough into the future about things like, we really ought to get our annual physical, right? And we discount the future too much, meaning we look into the future and look at things like the possibility of getting some sort of cancer. We don't put enough value on the preventive steps. And so from a social perspective, from a society level perspective, getting those additional treatments is actually beneficial. But to you as an individual, you might undervalue those visits. And so maybe we are actually better off if it feels like we're getting it for free, when in fact it's just being rolled into our premium, because it helps us because of the nature of the way we think as a species, right? It's not like any one of you, it's not liberals or Republicans think that everybody thinks this way, right? Everybody tends to discount the future. Everybody tends to discount things like preventive care to some degree more than they probably should. And so when presented with like the first a full cost situation, the full cost of preventive care, people will be like, wow, that's a lot of money. I could buy a new iPhone instead. They tend to buy the new iPhone instead of getting the preventive care. So insurance in some ways helps us discipline ourselves. But there is also a problem of overutilization that, when it feels like it's free, we will overutilize things that we don't really need to do. Like we don't really need to go to the orthopedic surgeon when we bang our knee. Our primary care provider is perfectly good at doing that. But you probably really ought to get your annual exam. You really ought to get your colonoscopy when you turn 50. You really ought to get your mammograms when you turn 40, and so on. So one of the things that managed care starts to do is tries to kind of rejigger the way that pricing happens in the marketplace. So, and we'll talk some more about that. Let's see. So, guys ever watch ER? This is like a kind of predates you guys. It's like the 90s. It was the third. I was just listening. There's a new book out called The 90s. It's a nonfiction account of kind of the cultural changes of the 90s, which is kind of my. So you guys are 20-ish, around 20, maybe not 20. You're not 20. No. Okay. But you're close. You wouldn't be sitting here if you weren't close, right? Okay. So I was 22 in 1992, so kind of about the same, pretty close to the same age as you back in the 90s. So anyway, so there was this so this guy is talking about the way we used to watch TV before Netflix, before cable really became like, actually became good. And the Thursday night lineup was Seinfeld, Friends, and then something in between, and then ER. Was usually the anchor, the NBC Thursday night lineup. So you guys, I'm guessing a bunch of you watch Friends. Yes? Yeah. Okay. My kids watch Friends too, which is humorous because Friends is like my generation, right? So they're all a bunch of Gen X kids, living in Manhattan in like multi-million-dollar apartments in Manhattan. Working at coffee shops, which, the apartments they have are like impossible for somebody who works in a coffee shop to have ever had. But it's my, so it's my generation. Anyway, fun book if you're interested in the culture changes of the 90s. It was kind of the last, like AOL, America Online, and access to the internet kind of began like in 1995. So, so like if you wanted to, it was super exciting to go on AOL, log on, and you got the "you've got mail" message, right? And you'd go on for like 3 minutes, download your mail, and then get off as quick as you could, because it cost like $5 a minute or something like that to be online. And now all of you are sitting online right now, probably on your computers at zero cost, which is really cool. Anyway, little aside. Fun book if you want to check it out. Some interesting stuff about the culture of the 90s. But one of the major cultural factors of the 90s was managed care and how it began to change the way we accessed care. Well, art reflects life. And one of the most common things that you would see on ER, one of the most common storylines that you'd see on ER each week was some parents bringing in their child and they've got some illness and they can't quite figure out what it is. And then, Mark Green, the guy with the glasses, heroically figures out that it's, they just need this one life-saving procedure because the child's going to die. And as the drama builds, the managed care insurance representative comes in and says, "You can't do that procedure for the child." And Mark Green says, "We must do that for the child or she'll die." And they're like, "No, you can't do that because that's not covered by their insurance plan." Had they kept their indemnity insurance, they would have been able to be covered by it, but they chose the managed care plan. And so now they can't. And everybody would cry because the managed care was terrible. And then they'd figure out some way and run around the bad managed care person, and they'd chase him off stage, and everybody would live happily ever after. And that was kind of the standard ER story, where managed care was almost always the villain coming in and telling you that you couldn't have something. And so the problem with that, of course, was, or there's a grain of truth in that, which is why it resonated, because everybody was suddenly feeling this pinch where they were like, "But I want to go see my orthopedic surgeon for my bum knee." No, you can't go see you have to go see your primary care provider. Why do I have to go see my primary care provider? Because you signed up for a managed care plan. And you can't just go to see any specialist you feel like going to see anymore. You have to follow our rules. And our rule is first you go to your primary care provider. They try to treat you. If they can't treat you, then they refer you to a specialist. That doesn't make any sense. I don't want to do that. I'm an American, live free or die, yada, 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 right? So we just weren't used to having anybody tell us what we could do, right? So it was very popular to malign managed care because it was very popular to see it on, ER because we were all experiencing that for the first time. For those of us who had insurance, we were all experiencing it for the first time, how frustrating it was to deal with all this gatekeeping. But the problem was patients were getting care in the most expensive places from the most expensive providers, and they weren't paying the full cost because insurance companies were paying most of it, right? And that's why insurance companies kept raising prices, because we kept building all this great equipment that we've talked about, right? That actually did good stuff. But, if you bang your knee and it's been hurting for 48 hours, you probably don't need an MRI right away, right? You only need an MRI if it hurts after 6 weeks, at which point we might say, there might actually be something seriously wrong there. Let's now go get an MRI. What actually makes sense first is to do an X-ray and maybe not even do that. But a managed care would say, well, under indemnity insurance, you could have gone straight to your orthopedic surgeon. The orthopedic surgeon could have immediately ordered an MRI and the insurance company would have paid for it. Under managed care, if you did that, if you had a managed care plan, if you have, and probably under any of your care plan that you're under now, if you're like, oh, bang my knee, I'm going to see an orthopedic surgeon. First of all, good luck getting in to see one. But if you could get in to see one, and then they're like, yeah, let's get an MRI, and you went and got the MRI without first running all this by your insurance company, you would get a huge bill in the mail, right, for the visit to the orthopedic surgeon and for your MRI. And your insurance company would say, we're not paying any of this because you didn't get it pre-authorized. You didn't go to your primary care provider first and get an authorization to A, go see an orthopedic surgeon, and then you didn't B, get an authorization to go to get an MRI. So all these things were the first time we were seeing them. And so it made for great television. So there's George Clooney, right? He kind of, all these guys, and this dude's in, what is it? The Tom Cruise movie with the jets. Top Gun. Remember Top Gun? No? Yeah, whatever. Anyway, a lot of people got their start on ER and then moved on to the movies. All right. So the big pushback was, you get what you pay for under indemnity insurance. Indemnity insurance is really expensive and you have a lot of choice. Under managed care, it's all about trading off choice for lower cost. But in order to get that lower cost, you have to submit yourself to the guidelines that the managed care company puts into place. So this is kind of a continuum of insurance. On the far left is indemnity insurance. So this is insurance that basically just says, go wherever you want to go. We'll pay after you've met your deductible. We'll pay some percent, right? We'll have co-insurance. So we'll pay some percent after you've met your deductible. We'll pay some percent, let's say 80%, because that's Medicare Part B pays 80% of professional service fees after you meet your deductible. So let's say, and so Medicare Parts A and B are indemnity insurance. So Medicare Part B will pay 80% of anything you go get. You can go see anybody you want, whenever you want. Medicare Part B will pay 80% of it after you've paid your deductible. So that's a classic example of indemnity insurance. Now they'll pay 80% of fair and reasonable. So it's, they have an idea of how much that is. They'll pay 80% of it. Medicare Part B, I mean, they have a, I guess I'm mixing up. They have a fee schedule, so they're not pure indemnity insurance. The old school indemnity insurance would have paid basically whatever the doctors said the charges were, as long as they weren't astronomical. The insurance company would pay it. Medicare Part B is kind of maybe a little bit to the middle, in the sense that they have a fee schedule that they'll pay, but you can go anywhere you want. So if you are a Medicare Part B user, you don't have to get an authorization to go see an orthopedic surgeon. You can just go see one, right? If you can get in. But then as we proceed to the far right, we start to sacrifice choice in order to get lower costs. And there's some good there. The managed care company is working hopefully on your behalf to a certain degree to make sure that you're getting quality care, right? So they're picking the doctors that they want in their network. Hopefully they're picking quality physicians and other kinds of providers, quality hospitals. They're paying attention to the kind of care you're getting. And so they're doing stuff like saying, no, you really don't need to go see an orthopedic surgeon. You really don't need to go get an MRI. And you as a patient might be like, I want to get an MRI. My knee hurts. I need to get an MRI. Well, you don't actually, we aren't always the best judge of what care we actually need. And so one of the kind of key things about managed care is the use of primary care as a gatekeeping function. Primary care can do a lot of stuff, right? Pretty well. So it's useful in the sense that managed care starts to say, hey, we're going to reduce our reliance on specialists and really focus more on primary care. And then we're going to focus again more on wellness rather than treating disease, right? So going back to our original discussion about health, what is health? Is it the absence of disease, or is it a state of wellness? Well, managed care has an incentive to try to keep you well. So we've got these various types of managed care that progressively become kind of more managed, if you will. I'm going to talk to each of them a little bit, but let me just kind of give each of them 5 seconds. So a PPO is when the managed care company, it's a preferred provider organization. The managed care company says, all right, if you're going to buy our insurance, we're going to identify providers, physicians, imaging centers, hospitals, and other facilities that provide the care that we're promising to cover. We're gonna give you a list to pick from, and that list we will have contracts in place with the providers on that list, right? And you can go to see any of those providers. That's called our network. So you can go to see any of those providers in our network, and you'll get to see those providers at a lower price. You can still go outside of the network, out of network. You can go out of network, but you'll have to pay a higher price to see a provider that's out of our network. So that still gives you a huge amount of choice. Like you can go see in a lot of PPOs, you can just go directly to a specialist if you want to, as long as the specialist is in the network, right? And you'll still get a lower price. So the PPO is kind of the least intrusive form of managed care. It basically they build a network, and they just basically say, play inside this network, right? Go seek care inside this network, and you'll get a discounted price. So the premiums are higher. You'll pay a higher premium because you have a lot of choice. You'll pay a higher premium. You now have a restricted number of providers that you can go to, but you still have kind of within the managed care world, you have the most choice under the PPO. Yeah. Yeah, No, that's a good point. So the question was, if they don't have so let's say you need a specialist and they don't have one in their network, will they give you kind of the in-network rate? I think so, but it would depend on the contract. I think generally speaking, yeah, like if they don't have a hand specialist, right, in their network, because that's a relatively infrequent use thing, then yeah, they would probably pay, you'd probably pay your in-network rate to go see somebody out of network. So then we move into kind of this broad scope of HMOs, health maintenance organizations. These are the ones where you start to really see managed care stepping in. And so HMOs typically have a higher level of control. They're characterized by you're having to go to a primary care provider first in order to get authorizations to go out to get specialty care. So the HMO, kind of in my mind, the defining thing about an HMO is you have to do a lot of this mother may I kind of thing, right? So you have to ask permission to get care beyond your primary care provider. So within that broader structure, and so they have contracts with providers, or they may own their own providers. So the IPA model, independent practice association model, what the HMO does is it contracts with another organization that organizes the network of providers that beneficiaries of the HMO system can go out and use. And so it's kind of like the HMO outsources the work to build the network and build the structure of the care that their patients are going to be able to get. So there's that model. The network model, the HMO builds its own network. So they build they build their own network. So instead of contracting with an IPA organization that goes out and builds a network, they build a network themselves. And then a group model, they work through a single group. So group meaning like a physician group. And so they contract with a single group that is supposed to provide all of the care. So you need to have a fairly large physician group to do that. And then they would buy care that's outside of the group, right, from other providers. And then the staff model is where the physicians and other providers are employees of the HMO. So Kaiser Permanente is kind of the original HMO in the United States, has an employed physician model. So Kaiser Permanente, if you're on the West Coast, Kaiser is a really dominant insurance program out there, and they own their own hospitals. They have, I forget, so it's Kaiser Permanente. It's actually two different companies that work together. I think Kaiser is the group that owns the hospitals and Permanente is the physician group, or it could be reversed. I don't know. It doesn't matter. So the physicians under Kaiser Permanente, which is a staff model, are employees of the HMO. And so they may get some bonuses and so forth, but they don't get additional compensation for seeing more patients typically. So that's the spectrum kind of. And so kind of what's moving along that spectrum as we go to the right is more and more tighter integration between the providers and the insurance companies. So at the far right, the staff model, the provider and the insurance companies are one entity, right? The physicians and the hospitals are owned by, the physicians are employed, they're not owned. They're employed by the insurance company, and the insurance company owns the hospital. So everything is all kind of in this one closed system. And as you move to the left, you get more and more fragmentation, if you will, more of a contractual arrangement, and it gets looser and looser. So on the far right, very tightly controlled in the sense that your physician is the employee, your primary care provider is an employee of your insurance company. Whereas out, at the PPO level, this year your provider might be part of the network, and maybe next year the physician he or she might choose not to be part of the network. All right, so let's talk a little more in detail about each of these. So indemnity insurance, this is the original insurance, right? This is the original health insurance. High deductible, high co-insurance rates, no gatekeeping function, right? So this is really cool. Go to see whoever you want, whenever you want. You have to pay fairly high premiums. But you don't have to do any of the mother may I stuff. You don't have to call, get an authorization. You don't have to go to see a primary care provider to get permission to go do something. You just go do it. There's no network restrictions. You can pick any provider. And the providers work on a fee-for-service payment, where the provider just gets this usual and customary rate. What I started to say about when I was saying Medicare is kind of an indemnity. Medicare has its own rates. It sets its own rates. So it's not pure indemnity, but it functions. The other pieces of this are very similar, right? There's no negotiations with providers under indemnity. So this is the loosest one where you get the most freedom as a patient. It's also the most expensive. So how do providers make money under this? Well, fee for service, right? So a provider's total revenues increase as they do see more patients. So this line here, so if I see one patient, I make, let's say $100. If I see two patients, I make $200. And so that line just keeps going up, right? The more patients I see, the more money I make. So that's classic fee for service. So revenue for the provider increases with each additional patient visit. PPO. So we've talked a little bit about this, but PPOs use a deductible and coinsurance, again, to try to limit excessive use. So the purpose of the deductible is that you at least give some thought to that first dollar that you spent, right? And then coinsurance, we want you to think it, well, it's going to cost me at least $20 to go. So it's not zero. The insurance company then, like I said, recruits a network of providers and negotiates a panel. We call it a panel. And as long as you get your care in that network, you pay a lower rate. If you go outside the network, you pay a higher rate. And so there's some variations on network. Obviously, well, it's not obvious. You can have a narrow network, which basically gives a very limited number of providers. This is common under, say, Medicaid managed care. So most states contract with managed care companies to manage their Medicaid population. So it's very common that they have what's called a very narrow network of providers who agree to provide care to the beneficiaries of this particular insurance company. When you have a very narrow network, you can negotiate deeper discounts. So if you don't care about having a lot of choice for your beneficiaries, or if your beneficiaries don't care particularly who they go see, you can use a narrow network format where you go out and you say, you put out, you contact a whole bunch of physicians and you say, hey, I realize the going rate is $100 per visit. We're going to offer $50 a visit, but we're only going to give it to one of you. So who's the lowest bidder here that's willing to take? And by the way, we've got 10,000 patients. So if you contract with us, yes, you'll get a low rate, but you'll get a lot of patients. So you can make it up on volume. That's the argument, right? Is it better to get 50 times 10,000 or 100 times 1,000? Well, 50 times 10,000 is 500,000. 100 times 1,000 is 100,000. So 500,000 is bigger than 100,000. So you're better off. You can conceivably make it up on volume. And so that's what these PPOs that run a narrow network is. They take bids, right, and they negotiate with providers, and they find a provider who is willing to take a very low rate with the promise of a very high volume. Now, from your perspective as a beneficiary, when you look at your network choices, there's like 3 physicians on the list, right? So there's very few physicians you can choose from, which is a turnoff for most people, because we do like choice as we generally like the idea that we can choose, different providers. So that's narrow network. And then what we talked a minute ago about in-network, out-of-network. So we have open panel plans. Open panel plans allow you, under open panel plans, we say, here's the list of providers that we've negotiated with. If you go to them, you'll get a lower rate. But if you go outside the network, out of network, you can still go out of network, but you will have a higher co-share, maybe a higher deductible, if you go see an out-of-network provider. Closed panel plans tell you you can't go out of network. If you go out of network, we're not paying, right? So you're on your own. So it's kind of an extreme example. So most plans are open panel plans, but closed panel plans do exist. And under PPO, physicians are getting providers. And so when I say provider, I mean physicians, hospitals, any provider is getting a fee-for-service payment. So they're getting payment per visit, per service, whatever they're doing. So that's your PPO, a little more detail. How does a PPO, how do provider revenues look under a PPO? Just like old school indemnity plans, right? The more you do, the more you make, right? So fee-for-service, the more you do, the more you make. Now, HMOs are kind of the rest of our story. So HMOs conceptually are built around the idea of wellness, hence health maintenance organizations. They're maintaining your health. So they want you to come in more often. In a sense, they want you to come in more often. But what they want you to do when you come in more often is they want you to see your primary care provider team. And they want you to come in and get preventive medicine. HMOs kind of do some things that indemnity insurance companies never used to do. They would early on, like I remember when these things started becoming popular over here on the East Coast in the 80s, hearing advertisements like, if you get, Harvard Pilgrim HMO, we will provide you free access to a gym. Free, meaning the cost of the gym is going to be rolled into your premium. UNH used to offer that. I'm not sure if we do still or not. I don't use it, but it used to be under our previous plan. They would pay, I think, up to $400 a year for a faculty member to use a gym, but you had to prove that so they'd pay up to $400 towards a gym membership, but you had to prove that you were actually going to the gym at least like 8 times a month or something like that. Otherwise they'd revoke so there used to be I don't know if you guys remember it in the before days, prior to the pandemic, there was a little Wildcat gym in the plaza where the Hannaford is over there in town, right? Anyway, there's this little private gym called Wildcat Gym. My wife and I used to go there. And a lot of faculty members would go there, and they had a little book as you come into the gym, and it was for UNH faculty to sign in, because they would keep track of how many times you came to the gym in order to get your little $400 benefit. So they priced the gym membership at $400 a year for UNH faculty, so that we get people to come to them. Anyway, so that's something that HMOs do. It's not uncommon for them to either provide a subsidy or pay for free gym membership, because we want to keep you healthy. Right? Now, usually the deductibles are lower, the coinsurance is lower, and the premiums are lower than indemnity insurance. Everything is cheaper about it. So like, how do you lose? Well, this is where you are going to be fairly tightly managed, right? So if you're okay with building around your primary care provider, in the sense that anything you want to do, you're going to have to run through your primary care team. And so the primary care team does all this gatekeeping, but it's not purely, in an ideal sense, it's not purely gatekeeping in the sense of just saying no, right? It is ideally your primary care provider is getting to know you, knows about your family, knows your history, knows that you were sick 2 years ago with mono. And so something that crops up today, might be related to a prior illness. And so ideally, they're not just gatekeeping, they're also coordinating your care, which is a problem in medicine in general, and in American medicine in particular. So ideally, the primary care provider knows everything about what you've done. And if you go to see a specialist, the specialist typically sends a report back to your primary care provider saying, so like, for example, I've told you I went to see my friend who's an ENT. I can access my records, my medical records, or at least parts of them. So I could see the report that my ENT sent back to my primary care provider saying, this is what I did. I stuck the tube down his nose and looked at his larynx and yada, yada, and, found this and that kind of stuff. So it's kind of interesting. And so my primary care provider is getting a report from my ENT. They're getting a report from my GI. They're getting a report from my hematologist, who I'm going to be seeing next week, about the blood thing that I've told you guys about. So the primary care provider is this reciprocal of all the different specialists coming in. And so ideally, the primary care provider kind of has all the information about your health status and is able to kind of make better judgments about your care and can work with you to manage your care, right? To coordinate your care. But it has this kind of hard, HMOs have this kind of hard policy to say, you do not go to see a specialist until you have seen your primary care provider, which can get frustrating because sometimes it's like, hey, I've got a pain in my shoulder. I've had it for 3 weeks. Primary care provider does an exam and says, well, we got 2 choices. You can go to physical therapy or you can go to an orthopedic surgeon. Which would you like to do? And, if you're smart, the answer is I'll start with physical therapy. And so, when you kind of know that's going to be the response, you're kind of like, yeah, I drove all the way over here, took my time off work to get the answer that exactly knew what you were going to say even before I walked in the door. And so now I've basically added one more visit that I didn't really need because if I could have just called you and said, hey, I hurt my shoulder, how about you give me a referral to physical therapy? Which some practices will do, but usually they want to see you in person. Okay. HMOs as a whole typically have restricted panels. So like a PPO, they have a panel of providers, a network that they've negotiated with. You can have open and closed plans. So depending on, if they can be narrow or wider plans. So the narrower it is, the more restrictions you agree to, for example, agree to a narrower plan, agree to a closed plan, your premiums are lower, right? But it's a trade-off. You pay for what you get. So if you want more choice, you're going to pay higher premiums. Now, what's different about an HMO is typically providers are capitated. And we've talked a little bit about this before, but a provider under a capitated system gets compensated differently. They get one fixed fee, right? Based on the number of lives, not the number of visits. So they get let's say $50 per member per month, right? So if you come in and you do an additional visit, they don't get any more revenue. There's no additional revenue. So the line is a straight line, a horizontal line, because additional visits don't generate additional revenue for them. They get their revenue based on the number of patients that they see. So if you're getting a $50 per member per month payment and you have 10 members, you get 10 times $50, $500 per month, right? So you get $500 this month, whether none of your patients come in or if they all come in, right? If they all come in, you probably burn through all your revenues paying for the care that you're providing them. So what's cool about this is the providers are motivated to minimize your utilization because they get the same amount of revenue, they get a fixed payment. And if you go use expensive care and you get hospitalized a lot, they're going to lose money. And so their motivation is to keep you healthy and keep you out of the hospital, keep you from going to see expensive specialists. So they're really motivated to take care of you. Hence the reason they pay for things like gyms and gym memberships is if you go to the gym on a regular basis, you're more likely to be healthier than if you don't, right? So they encourage behavior like that. So I kind of talked to each of these a little bit, talk a little more about them again. So again, the most extreme form is the staff model. So think Kaiser Permanente. The health insurer and the health and the provider are one and the same entity. So they employ the physician. So the physician doesn't stand to earn more money by doing expensive things to you because they're employed by the hospital. I had a friend this is very much the military model in the sense that the hospitals that I worked in when I was in the Army, right? Everybody's an employee of the hospital. The doctors were an employee of the hospital, right? The doctors were Army officers, so they were all part of the system. And I remember had a friend who was an ENT doc. He was a neighbor of mine, and we were friends at work. And I remember hearing him talking to a patient and explaining to a patient about his choices for what options that he could do for the patient, and discussing, we could do this, or this. And he said, I don't get paid anymore if we do something more aggressive or we do more treatment. So it's not like I don't have an incentive here to do more care to you because I get the same, at the end of the month, I just get my military pay and that's that. That's not true in the private sector, right? A physician in the private sector, if they're not an HMO employee, a physician under fee for service gets paid more if they do more to you. And so there's this concept called, and you should know this, it's in the book, it's called induced demand, induced demand, INDUCED, induced demand. And this is physician-induced demand is when a physician basically decides they're on the bubble between, they need to be able to prove that this care could be regarded as medically necessary. But if they're on the bubble between doing a procedure or not doing a procedure, and they get compensated more if they do the procedure, they're likely to do the procedure, right? If they can justify it, they're more likely to do the procedure. Now that is, if you ask a physician that, they'd probably say, no, I wouldn't do that. But, we're all human beings. And if you've got an expensive mortgage and medical school student loans to pay, you're looking to do procedures, right? Because you get compensated. Your compensation is tied to the number of procedures that you do under a fee-for-service model. So physicians, because they decide what's necessary and they benefit from doing more, financially benefit from doing more procedures, they have a incentive to do more under fee-for-service. Under capitation, under what's typically an HMO format, they're getting a fixed payment. And so doing more costs them something. So if they go in to do a procedure, there's going to be supply costs, there's going to be nursing costs, there's going to be all these costs involved. And so under capitation, they've already gotten what they're going to get, and their goal is to save money. So they're going to err on the side of doing less. And generally speaking, erring on the side of doing less is the preferred outcome for healthcare. So physicians can induce demand in the sense that they can decide something is, they can look at a situation and they can apply their judgment. And if it's a marginal case of it could go either way, they can lean towards doing it under fee for service, and under capitation, their incentive is to not do it. Okay, so we have the staff model where the physician is employed, an employee of the practice. Excuse me, an employee of the insurance company. So oftentimes what the physician will get as a bonus is a share of the profit. So if they can save money, they will actually get a bonus if they can save money by doing less care. Group model, talked a little bit about where they HMO contracts with a multi-specialty group that agrees to provide all the care. So one of the groups that I work with pretty regularly in my department, through my department, is Maine Medical Partners. So anybody from like the Portland area in here? Okay. So do you get your care from Maine Medical Partners or from the Maine Health System? Yeah. So your doctors are part of, almost certainly part of Maine Medical Partners. And Maine Medical Partners was actually founded by an HMP grad. Yay. He's the, what is his role now? Chief Administrative Officer, or something like that. He's basically the second in command. It's gotten big enough they want to have a physician as the official leader. But Maine Medical Partners employs 1,000 physicians around kind of south central Maine. 1,000 physicians. It's a lot of physicians. It's a big group. And so an HMO might contract with Maine Medical Partners to say, provide us all the care. And so then they'd pay them a capitated rate. They'd say, we have 10,000 beneficiaries, and we're going to pay you X dollars per month per beneficiary. So it'd be X times 10,000 would be their monthly payment. And then it's up to Maine Medical Partners to keep the medical spend, right, below whatever the rate is that they're receiving from the insurance company, because they don't get more money from the insurance company. That's the nature of capitation. And that's the risk that you take on when you take on a capitated contract, is you're getting $100,000 a year, let's say, to provide care to this group of patients. So if you spend 90,000, you get to keep 10,000. 100 minus 90 is 10,000. So you get a profit of 10,000. But if you spend 110,000 to provide that care, the insurance company doesn't give you any more money. You just lose $10,000. So it's risky. So a lot of these things, so some of the things that happened under the managed care revolution was insurance companies like HMOs started coming to groups, large groups, even large groups like Maine Medical Partners in the 90s, right? And they would make an offer, we'll pay you X dollars per month, per member per month, and you agree to provide all the care to this many beneficiaries. Well, the practices at that point in time were not sophisticated enough to realize that they were taking on a lot of risk. One really sick baby, for example, one preemie that has to spend 6 months in a NICU will ring you up millions of dollars in cost. And so if you make a bad contract, the one sick baby could wipe out all your profit for the year, right? So a lot of physicians hated managed care because they weren't in a position to negotiate contracts that would be beneficial to them. A lot of them wound up losing money by contracting with managed care. So they started walking away from managed care contracts. So it was kind of a pushback toward the end of the 90s. There was a pushback against managed care. So Group model, we talked about. Network model, a little looser. So in this case, we're starting with the tightest management at the top staff, and we're moving to kind of the loosest. So network model, now the HMO contracts not with one group, but with multiple groups, right? They all get some sort of capitated rate. And then the independent practice model is sort of a it's a kind of a, if you think of like subcontracting, right? The HMO subcontracts out to the IPA, and then the IPA creates their own network. Okay. So on the one hand, the good news story was, on the one hand, managed care slowed down the increases in medical spending that we had been seeing from the 60s through the 80s and into the 90s. So we saw that it was effective at slowing down spending, but physicians didn't like it, right? Because it pushed a lot of risk on them. They didn't like it if, from a capitated perspective, they didn't like it. They didn't like it. They didn't like the networking piece where they were forced into networks, and the insurance companies would bargain with them to drive down their rates. And so they were having to do more at lower reimbursement. So physicians found themselves suddenly having to work harder to make the same amount of income that they had historically made. So there was a lot of resentment from that side. You know, physicians used to work shorter days, see fewer patients, but as managed care stepped in and started squeezing them and saying, well, if you want to be in the network, you have to take a lower rate, but you can make it up on volume. Well, great. That means I just have to work more hours in the day to make the same amount of money that I used to make. So physicians hated it, right? And then patients hated it because it used to be we could just go see whoever we wanted, whenever we wanted, and the insurance company would pay for it, right? And all that kind of appears in pop culture. You know, shows like ER really captured that angst that we had about it. But something needed to be done, right? Something needed to be done because healthcare costs were rising at such a rapid rate. All right, we'll stop there. We'll finish up our discussion of managed care next time. And I'll talk a little more about your project coming up as well.